All right, go ahead and introduce yourself, who you help, how you help them, all of that good stuff.
Well, my name is Shel Horowitz. I live in Hadley, Massachusetts, United States. I am an expert at helping businesses find their particular unique sweet spot where environmental and social good intersect with profitability. And those things sound like they're really, really wide apart, but I've managed to braid them together, the activist side and the marketer side. And that excuse me. I'm also the author so far of 10 books. This is the most recent, Guerrilla Marketing to Heal the World. And that is my fourth book on that intersection of business and activism. And the people I help are usually either small companies, authors and publishers, or activists in helping to make those connections. And my next book that I'm working on now is really focused entirely on the activist side. The working title is Showing Up and Stepping In, and it's about how to be an activist when you're 60 or older. I'm 69, so I've been in that demographic for most of a decade, and I do find that there are differences, and that my friends who are in their 80s or 90s and are still being activists, it's a very different set of circumstances than it was when we were in our 30s or 40s or teens or 20s. So that's kind of who I help. In terms of how I got into serving these business clients, I had a fairly traditional small shop, small client um, marketing, copywriting, and consulting agency. And then a developer decided that walk over to the window here. You can see a little mountain behind the farm that I live on. That mountain is a state park. It's called Skinner State Park, also known as Mount Holyoke. The college is 3 miles away, and it was named for the mountain. So the mountain next to that was where a developer decided he was going to put 40 McMansions going all the way up to the ridge line. And I was the one who said, I don't think so. So I started a movement and went in it. I think this is very important. Mindset makes a huge difference. I went in it with the mindset that we were going to win this. I also thought it would take 5 years. With that positive mindset, we won in 13 months flat, 1 year plus 1 month. And we won so quickly that I was unprepared for victory and I didn't have a plan B for what the organization should do next. So the organization, which was enormously successful, died, but the legacy of not having to drive by 40 McMansions every time I go to town is very much still there. And the ripples that changed town government are still there. We changed the number of people who run the town and got good people into the three of the 5 seats that were up that year. It had been just 3 seats, and a lot of other ripples from that. And then I started thinking, well, this campaign took everything I knew about marketing into the activist world. What can I take from the activist world into the business side? And that's when I came up with this idea that environmentally friendly, socially conscious, ethical businesses were actually poised to be more successful than cut your throat traditional competitive businesses. And I was able to integrate that very nicely into this work. And it turned out the research bore out my hypothesis. So in fact, all pretty much everything I've ever read shows not only that socially and environmentally conscious businesses tend to do better, but it shows why. And people trust you more. You have less friction to overcome. People want to buy from companies who are doing the right thing. People are tired of greenwashing and people lying and people cheating, and they want a simpler world where people do what they say they're going to do and do it well and do it in a way that benefits not just themselves, not just even their customers, but also the world around them. So I think I also answered your second question too.
Yeah, you did. So, what kinds of collaborations have you done? And what are some of the benefits you have gotten from those collaborations?
Well, I've always had the attitude that my competitors are people who their work is aligned with mine and in some ways different, and maybe we can be complementary. So I've always had a good relationship going way back to when my business was basically just a typing service, and I got acquainted with my competitors. And one of them called me up out of the blue one day and said, "Hey, I want to make a quill order and I don't have enough for the minimum free shipping. You want to order anything?" And I'm like, "What's Quill?" Well, Quill is a discount office supply house, and that one call saved me thousands of dollars over the next 40 years. And that was one very early demonstration to me of the importance of collaboration. I also, at that time, I was going to a networking group of owners of secretarial services. And I found that there were people who loved to do dictation, which I loathed, and hated to write resumes, which I enjoy and am good at and still do. So by going to those meetings, I found that I could offshore all the dictation calls that came to me. There were two or three businesses that wanted them. And meanwhile, four or five of the other businesses were like, "Great, we know somebody who can write you a resume." And so it was a wonderful partnership. It was a sort of an octopus partnership because it wasn't one to one. It was one to several. And it was great. And so all of these things reinforced that collaboration was important. My first book actually is even earlier than that. I was working for a literary agent in New York City. His name was Richard Curtis, and he had written a book on nuclear power that I had used in a college term paper years earlier, long before I met him. And he knew that. And he knew that I was had an interest in safe energy, which nuclear power is not. And when Three Mile Island happened, he got an immediate contract from a publisher in Harrisburg, right next to the power plant, that to redo the book. And he didn't have time to do it, so he threw it to me. I was originally going to be just ghostwriting it, but they liked what I did so much that they put my name on the cover as the with person. So Richard Curtis and Elizabeth Hogan with Shel Horowitz, and I was 23 and I had a book published. So that was pretty cool. And it just went on and on. My entire life has been built around collaborations. I have participated on the activist side in a number of big coalitions that were made of little small groups. I was actually a nominally paid Vista volunteer community organizer for the Gray Panthers, 1979 and 80. And I took the Gray Panthers into a coalition called Brooklyn Alliance for Survival, which was a safe energy no nukes group. And that was something that the Gray Panthers would not have done without me. And we became part of that coalition along with another group I was involved with, the Brooklyn Anti-Nuclear Group, and five or six others in this borough of 2 million people. And we were much more effective as a joint force than we were separately. And right now, here in Massachusetts, I am part of another statewide coalition. I represent the Clamshell Alliance on a group called the Commonwealth Coalition for Democracy and Safe Energy. And just yesterday, we won a major victory in a Senate bill that did not have the repulsive provision that we have been fighting against for a year that the House bill passed. So now we have to keep it out of the conference version. But that victory would not have happened without the coalition that was built of these many organizations. So it's just always opportunities I find. So I wrote two books with J. Conrad Levinson, the person who invented the Guerrilla Marketing brand, as a nominal co-author, which is to say his name is first on the cover because people know who he is and they don't know my name. But I did most of the work. He wrote 300 words for the book, and I wrote 45,000 for the first book, and then another 20,000 after that for the revised, expanded new title. By which time he had passed away, but his widow allowed me to use the same 300 words that he had done and another 300 words that I had found on something that only had his byline on it. So total of 600 words that he contributed to that book, but he contributed the star power, the mailing list, and a lot of other good stuff. And I got a lot of benefit from it. And people say, "Well, why did you do that? He gets all the glory. You did all the work." I said, that book has opened more doors for me than anything else I've done pretty much, except maybe being a TEDx speaker. And that was a networking thing too, actually. I knew the woman who organized the TEDx where I spoke through a networking group called Hidden Tech. And it was basically home-based entrepreneurs doing something that involved the use of a computer. And through her, I had to pitch her several times before I got one that she liked. but I did a TEDx talk. And it was a very small group, but I am on the TED site with that talk. It's hard to find, but it's there.
What was your TED Talk about?
I'm sorry.
What was your TED Talk about?
My TED talk was called Impossible is a Dare, and it was based on this wonderful quote from Muhammad Ali. Let me get to it. There we go. Impossible is just a big word thrown around by small men who find it easier to live in the world they've been given than to explore the power they have to change it. Impossible is not a fact, it's an opinion. Impossible is not a declaration, it's a dare. Impossible is potential. Impossible is temporary. Impossible is nothing. And I just realized my light is off, and that's probably not good for your viewers. Turn that on.
It actually looks pretty good. So,
Is that better or worse?
it's about the same, so
All
don't
right,
worry
I'll
about
leave it
it.
on then. If I have to read anything else, it'll be easier.
Yeah, I did an
Uh,
interview a while back where I was interviewing him at sundown and it was gradually getting darker and then I think he had to turn the lights on. So that was kind of interesting lighting wise, but yeah.
yeah. Well, so the talk was really about how these huge social problems that have been plaguing us for all of human history, war, catastrophic climate change, hunger, poverty, they're all resource issues, and resource issues are solvable. And we have the solutions.
So we talked about collaborations, but how have you changed your networking strategy over time, including the types of collaborations you are doing from when you were just starting until now?
Well, the main thing for networking for me is that I used to be an introvert, and I know we're talking more about that later. And I would always just hang out by the food table and sort of maybe start a little conversation with somebody else who was shy and hanging out by the food table. And now I'm just very social about it, but I'm a follower of Bob Berg, who wrote Endless Referrals and Winning Without Intimidation, and who gave me a book endorsement, actually. And I find that the strategy of listening more than you talk, of really paying attention, not just, so many people hate networking because they think networking is like the used car sales guy coming up and thrusting a card at you and saying, you need to send people my way and then buy now, I'm on to the next. Yeah, no wonder people don't like it, you know, whereas like, oh, what kind of, what makes you passionate about what the work you do, and ask a question like that and just see where it takes you. And I did this when had a radio show too, and let people really talk at some length. And it's not about quantity, it's about quality. One of the network meetings that I consider an enormous success was one where I talked to exactly one person, someone I'd known about for years, someone who had known about me for years, and we talked for an hour and a half. And I was introduced to him by one of his clients. Like, Cinda comes up and says, "Oh, you have to meet this person." And once she said his name, like, "Oh yeah, I know who you are. You're the environmental lawyer who usually represents the people I'm fighting against." We had a lot to talk about, and it was a great conversation. And I felt like Michael and I became friends, and it was interesting to know that his background was actually in the environment, even though the people who paid his bills were usually the ones trying to destroy it. So I'm glad I don't have to live with that dichotomy in my own business, but that's his problem, not mine. And it was a very good connection. And if you look at the traditional way that people are told to network, or the other thing I see is like, you'll see everybody who works at the same bank, they're in a cluster at the networking meeting and they never get out of the cluster. And like, why did you bother coming? Go socialize, go meet some people. They don't necessarily have to become your banking clients. There are other ways to build relationships, and you never know. Maybe, I met that really nice banker over there. They might be the perfect place for you to go for your $200,000 startup loan that you need, or whatever. You never know how it's going to ripple out. But I don't go into it with the idea of like, I'm going to accomplish this and this and this. I'm going in with the idea that I'm going to broaden my network, meet interesting people, have good conversations, sometimes follow up with people and have longer conversations. You and I met at a networking event, and then we had a one-to-one, and now we are here on your podcast. But I didn't come in to the call with the agenda of like, oh, I've got to be on more podcasts. It was just part of the way the process evolved. And whether it's in person or online, I feel like the rules of how I go in are pretty much the same. The outcomes are pretty much the same. And I find that I get great joy out of connecting people who ought to know each other, and sometimes they do business together. And meanwhile, I am being seen as somebody who's really helpful and has other people's interests and minds and not just my own, and who's doing all this good work in the wider world. And a lot, and I mean a lot, of my client income comes from referrals. Almost nobody randomly stumbles over my website and decides to hire me. Sometimes they've read a book or they've listened to me do an interview or they've listened to me give a speech. But most of the time, somebody else who may not have even done business with me says, oh, you need to talk to Shel. He can help you. Yeah, like I did a lot of in the 90s and aughts, I was doing a lot of networking via internet discussion groups that were email based. So they're not in real time. It's asynchronous, as they say. So somebody writes a query and other people answer and respond. And I responded to many of those queries with good advice. And then what happened was not only were other ordinary publishers on this list of publishers, celebrities in that world, people who wrote books that were very famous on how to be a good self-publisher, were starting to send me clients. And one of them even started having me share his podium when he gave talks sometimes. So you just, and this was just all from being nice and helpful. Again, I didn't go into it with the idea that this was going to win me clients. I was actually kind of surprised when that started to happen. And the first client I got through an online publishing discussion group was somebody who I had disagreed with publicly, but politely. So like, wow, that's interesting. You just said you didn't even believe in what I do, and now you're hiring me, and now you're the first one. I'll take it.
Now, how did you get book endorsements from Jack Canfield and Seth Godin? And just refresh everybody because not everybody in my audience knows who those people are.
Okay.
So,
Jack Canfield is the co-creator of the Chicken Soup for the Soul series. And I went up to him at Book Expo America, which at the time was the largest publishing industry event in the country. It has since folded. It didn't survive COVID, alas. But I went up to him and I said, Jack, I've got an idea for a chicken soup book. I want to do miso soup for the vegetarian soul. My name is Shel Horowitz. And he says, are you the same Shel Horowitz that sends me jokes? And for the first 10 seconds, my brain was going, huh? And then I remembered that Dan Poynter, who was one of those publishing industry celebrities and was a friend of neighbor of Jack Canfield. He died some years ago. Dan, Jack is still very much with us. Forwarded jokes around, and Dan was on my list. And I had seen Jack's responses to some of those. So I said yes. And that began a conversation. We didn't end up doing the Vegetarian Soul book. He was mildly discouraging, but not so discouraging that I didn't put out some feelers. But the submissions I was getting were total crap, and I decided it wasn't worth doing the book. But I went back to him several years later, knowing now that he knew who I was, and asked him for a book endorsement for the first self-published version of what became Guerrilla Marketing to Heal the World eventually. And he gave me one. And but in the meantime, I'd been occasionally commenting on his newsletter and that sort of thing. And Seth Godin, who wrote Purple Cow, who wrote All Marketers Are Liars, who wrote The Dip, who wrote a whole lot of really important business books. Basically, like many people, he has a newsletter. And like many people, he gets emails from me when he writes about something that's meaningful to me or I have a different twist on it. And so over the years, we've had a correspondence. So by the time I asked him for a book endorsement, I had been writing to him on and off for about 20 years. And he's very good about actually, once you get into the position of being somebody whose emails he pays attention to, he's very quick to respond usually. So, and his personal address is different from the reply address on his newsletter. But I have done this with dozens and dozens of people, not all of them well known. I did it with Bob Berg, who I mentioned earlier, is I just, when they write something that I feel I got some value out of, I share that with them and they love it. And and then if years later I ask them for a favor, they are going to treat that with some respect and usually say yes. And sometimes I once asked Jimmy Carter for a book endorsement, and I didn't have that kind of relationship with him. But I did write this letter about how I really admired what he was doing with the Carter Center and how he had used his ex-presidency to really advance the causes of world peace and justice. And I got a lovely note back, and I got put on his Christmas card list, which I wish I had saved them. For some reason I didn't. But every year I would receive a Christmas card with a hand done, I mean, mass produced, obviously, but the original was a hand drawn piece of art by Jimmy Carter. So even though I didn't get the book endorsement, I got some very cool things from that, and I really respected it. He said his people said that he didn't do book endorsements, and that's almost true. I did find one book for a family member of his that had his endorsement. Um, but anyway, it was a delightful surprise to discover that he was a visual artist. Everybody knows that about George W. Bush, but hardly anybody knows that Carter did it too. And Carter actually was a better artist than George W. Bush.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Jack Canfield and Seth Godin, or did you talk about Seth Godin? I'm trying to
I'm sorry,
remember.
that was a little blurry. Can you say it again?
Yeah, did you talk about Seth Godin? I'm trying to remember and who he is.
Yeah, I did. I talked about how I had written him letters for 20 years before ever asking for a book endorsement.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I actually got an
I was
endorsement
a
from
little
him for one of my
distracted.
clients later. Um, yeah, so and there's been many others. I have in this book, I have a couple of dozen book endorsements, and that's one of the things I think people don't realize how much a book endorsement. If somebody's in a physical bookstore and they're opening the cover, and the first thing they see, in my case, they see Jack Canfield, Seth Godin, Ivan Meisner, who founded Business Network International (BNI), Jacqueline Ottman, who's a major author in the green business space, Chris Brogan, who's an internet guru, Joel McCower, who is the executive director of what was then called greenbiz.com, which is probably the largest um, support network for green business owners in the world. Michael Port, who wrote Think Big Manifesto, Alicia Bay Laurel, who I met on Facebook as a friend. Um, she is connected to somebody who I was already Facebook friends with, and I admired Alicia Bay Laurel since her book came out around 1970. And we've become friends via Facebook. Bob Bly, I actually met in person at workshops and we became friends. Tim Sanders, I reviewed his book and then I wrote him a nice note and sent him a copy of the review and we corresponded. And so he wrote Love is the Killer App, Saving the World at Work. That's page one. There's several more pages. I won't read you all the names, but all of these people I built relationships with in one way or another over time. I'm not sure I asked any of them cold. And there was one when I did the earlier self-published version, I wrote to a friend of mine asking for an endorsement. She says, I love this book so much that not only am I giving you an endorsement, I'm going to introduce you to Al Ries, who wrote a lot of books about marketing and positioning that are very famous. And so I got an endorsement from him too, without ever having contacted him. So you just never know.
Yeah. One of the things you did to nurture some of these relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. I nurtured them with years of sustained and not necessarily consistent contact. Some of them sign up for my newsletter, but not many. But mostly it's just if, let's say, in the course of a year, maybe 6 times I'm writing to somebody, that's enough to get noticed and remembered. And it might be twice in one week, and then it might be not for 4 months. It um, really depends. But it's most of these celebrities, except at the very top tier, are pretty accessible. And even then, I did a lot of music journalism in my 20s and 30s. And that meant I was on the phone with people like Joan Baez. I went backstage to interview Pete Seeger and Arlo Guthrie. As you can figure out, I'm in the folky niche. Um, but these people actually, through another friend of mine, I got invited to help Pete Seeger one day build one of the boats that he built that sailed the Hudson River. So I spent an afternoon hammering nails with Pete Seeger with his, like, I don't know, 100 record albums or whatever and 50-year career in music. He was just building his boat. Not a real talkative guy, actually, one-on-one. But you just never know. You never know. And saying thank you also helps a lot. It's expressing gratitude really warms people's hearts. And it works both ways. I had another very well-known musician in the folk scene, Paul Winter. I'd seen him perform at a huge rally where I was a peacekeeper. 1 million people came to that rally. And 2 or 3 hours later, we crossed paths on the streets of Manhattan. And he came up to us because we were wearing our peacekeeper t-shirts, and he thanked us for what we had done that day. And like, wow, and thank you for what you did. Your set was beautiful. And but he, even as something of a superstar, had the humility and grace to notice that other people had contributed to that event and to go out of his way to make them feel appreciated.
Yeah, that's quite a story. What would you say are the best ways to get the most out of networking?
Go in without much of an agenda, and certainly not any kind of quantity agenda like I'm going to hand out 20 business cards. Um, Go in with the idea that something serendipitous will happen and you don't necessarily know what it is yet. And go in with the idea that it may have ripple effects that you don't even know about for anywhere between a few minutes and a couple of decades. You just don't know. But that it's really a good idea to have a wide network and to help people within that network to connect people that you know who might need to talk to each other, and then just let karma take care of the rest. And you may not be able to put a dollar value on what you're doing, but I think about the people who have paid me multiple tens of $1,000s over our client relationship, and nearly all of them came out ultimately through some sort of networking encounter.
Getting comfortable being uncomfortable is part of the entrepreneur skill set. What helped you get past that when things felt uncomfortable?
Doing them anyway. As I said, I started out being very shy and being a fairly poor networker, and just kind of listening and watching and seeing what was working for people and where people appeared to have conversations that were meaningful. You could see the radiance in their faces, and you could see that they were loath to separate and start another conversation because this one was so interesting. So looking to hear what was interesting about other people, which I find then makes me interesting to other people. And just realizing that the shyness wasn't serving me, and acting as if I was an extrovert until it actually became the reality. I was once at a conference that was my wife's professional organization, and she went there with a bunch of colleagues. And they're like the bankers, they're all huddled in a corner of the room, and I'm going out meeting people. And I came back with a plate full of exotic cheese and a pocket full of business cards. And they're like, how'd you do that? But it does, if you like practicing anything else, eventually it becomes second nature. I wasn't born a terrific writer. I had to learn how to do that. Um, I I mean, if I have to write anything by hand, it's horrible. It's My handwriting is atrocious. I can't read it. Nobody else can read it. And I am very grateful to live in an age where we had first typewriters and then computers and now dictation, although I find that the dictation is not very accurate and I have to clean it up a lot, and I may as well just type it in the first place because I am a fast typist. But public speaking, I've been doing it so long that actually I was never terrified of it, and it's the most common fear. It's like people are more afraid of giving a speech than of dying. Like, come on, man, are you kidding me? I find I really react positively to being celebrated for being there, for people coming to hear what I have to say, for people wanting to buy my lunch so that they can talk to me one-on-one, for sometimes VIP treatment, sometimes not, but that's not a big deal to me. I mean, I have never traveled first class except once when I was upgraded on a tiny little flight from Washington, D.C. to New York. But I have flown 15-hour flights in economy class. So, if somebody gives me a comfortable bed in a house of a non-smoker instead of a hotel room, that's totally fine with me. I'm in actually two homestay networks, and that's another whole different way of networking. And I guess going all the way back when I was 19, I had just finished college, and I hitchhiked across the US and Canada. And what I learned very quickly is when you get in the car, you have to figure out what they want from you. And sometimes they want you to tell them stories. Sometimes they want you to help with the driving. Sometimes they want you to entertain the kids in the back seat. Sometimes they just want you to admire their beautiful car. And the clues are out there to find. So if you read the room, and if the room is one car with one other person in it, it's pretty easy to read. You can give them some semblance of what they want. And if they want something creepy, you find an excuse to get the fuck out of the car. um, and I've had to do that a couple times too. But that's really it's a skill, and it's a skill you can nurture.
I think that's a good point. Networking is definitely a skill. So
Yeah.
what have you
And it's
found?
also a skill to extricate yourself from a bad networking conversation.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what were you going to ask?
Yeah, I was going to ask, what have you found is the best way to balance networking with other things in your business and your life so that you don't get burnt out?
Well, I don't get burnt out on networking very much because number one, I find it fun. Number two, these days, 98% of my networking is on Zoom. And I set limits. Like on Tuesdays, I have my choice. I will either go to Hale's 3 o'clock networking or Gary's 4:30 networking, 4 o'clock networking. And I won't go to both. It's too much. I don't want to do back-to-back calls. And if I go to something like Speaker Exchange where I'm going to have 20 follow-ups I have to make, I don't necessarily go back the next week because I'm still following up from the first week. And I try to get it so that if there are people I want to follow up with, I do it fairly quickly. But sometimes if it's a really I hate to use the phrase lucrative haul here. Let me find another metaphor. If it's a really big stack of contacts and I'm going through the transcript of the Zoom call and I'm finding 6 or 7 people I want to network with, I won't necessarily follow up with all of them that day. It might take me 2 or 3 days to get through it, and I might skip another networking call so I don't overload. And then in person, if I'm at a conference, I make a point of going outside at every break. And if somebody wants to network with me, like, yeah, come take a walk with me. I want sunshine. I need air. I usually take a walk in the woods or a bike ride every single day that it's not absolutely horrendous weather. And we used to have a dog, and we call it walking the virtual dog. The dog died in 2011, and we're still taking the daily walk. So yeah, a lot of things like that. I take a lot of time off. I travel more than most people I know, and I can be traveling pretty intensely. I will have a dawn to 9 p.m. set of activities that I'm doing, but many of those activities are, while physically tiring, they're emotionally regenerating, like hiking, like walking through interesting urban neighborhoods, like going to a museum. But I do find like museums, usually an hour and a half to 2 hours is all I want to do at a museum. And then I need a different kind of energy. So the advantages to being somewhat ADD is that I'm interested in just about everything. It's why I became a writer. So I can be very interested in the 2,000-year-old uh, ruins of an ancient Roman city, but I can also be very interested in the fashion patterns of a multi-ethnic neighborhood in New York City, just walking around.
Sounds like you have that balance for yourself.
Mostly. There are days, but mostly yes.
Besides collaborations, what are some of the benefits you have gotten out of networking and how has it helped your business?
Well, I've gotten speeches, I've gotten interviews, I've gotten book endorsements, I've gotten clients. I've gotten, what else have I got? I've gotten just fun people in my life. I've gotten a bunch of new Facebook friends. um, and I've gotten a sense of community because one of the things about the online world, networking is that a lot of times you're seeing the same people over and over again at either the same events, like today you and I might see each other at Michael Whitehouse's call this afternoon. Um, but you then might show up on the meeting of another networking group I'm in, and we cross paths and we learn a little about each other. There are some people who seem to do this full time. I don't really know how they're balancing it, but like no matter what networking event I show up when, I can pretty much expect that two or three people are going to be the same two or three people are going to be at all of those events. And but I'm pretty good at limit setting, and I value the group, this large group. I value the small group, the breakout session, and I value the one-to-one that might come out later. And one of the nice things about Zoom is that between the chat and some of the calls allow you to take a transcript. Yours doesn't, by the way. Um, it's you can have when you reach out to somebody, you can look at that, and particularly if there's a transcript, you can see what it was that made you want to reach out to them in the first place, what they were talking about, what their contact info is without having to research it. And there you go. And it's in some ways much easier than having to, like when I used to go to more in-person events, I went with a pen in my pocket. And if somebody handed me a business card, I would write on the back of it what I wanted to talk to them about and what kind of follow-up I was going to do right then and there, even if they were still looking. And I would get very frustrated when somebody handed me a card that was laminated on both sides or that had so much text on both sides that there was no room to work. But usually there'd only be one or two of those per meeting. And if I would deal with them right away when I got home, I would know what those were. But being able to look at the transcript and say, oh, this person is interested in climate justice and has a little business there. I had a one-on-one in person yesterday with somebody I met at a chamber mixer who was in that role exactly. And we had a very lovely hour at the coffee shop across the street from my house.
What are your thoughts on tapping into your intuition and how do you use it when networking?
Wow. Intuition is something I rely on a lot. I call it the guide, and I will mentally ask a question, and I will expect my body to be leaning forward or backward, or if it's a multiple choice thing, left, right, or center, to which choice I should do. And sometimes I'll ask a clarifying question like, is the reason that you're suggesting this because of X? And then I can evaluate if that's the right motivator for me. So it's something that I use. I'm more right-brained, I think, than a lot of people who rely on intuition in a more public way than I do. But it's still I've discovered that while the guide's batting average is certainly not 100%, it's considerably higher than my batting average without the guide. So I've been sent down some wrong rabbit holes, but on the whole, it's been good. And then in a situation like when I was hitchhiking, I wasn't in touch with the guide at that point, but I definitely trusted my intuition. Is this a safe car to get into? And if the answer was no, no matter how appealing it seemed to be, I would find some reason not to get into that car. And as I said, there were only on that whole summer of hitchhiking, there were, I think, two times where I had to leave a car. And that's not bad odds out of hundreds and hundreds of rides.
Any closing remarks or things that you want to add?
Well, I want to bring it back to the activist side because one of the things that really motivates me is the belief that each one of us can make the world better and make our own lives better at the same time. And networking is one among many tools for doing that. I have been an activist since I was a 12-year-old kid in 1969, and it really gives my life purpose. And it makes for much more interesting networking conversations when you can talk about some of these moments in history that you've actually been part of or the changes that you have made. Sometimes it's as simple as like in the city I was living in at the time, I can point to a crosswalk and a stop sign that I got, as well as the first non-smokers' rights regulations in that town, which required all restaurants to have a non-smoking section. It was interesting because they fought hard against it, the restaurant industry. Once they had it and they realized that's where the demand was, the majority of restaurants went fully non-smoking long before they were legally required to, because that law didn't come in for another 10 years or so. And the law that I helped put in um, showed them that most people wanted non-smoking. That's a big change. I mean, it sounds like nothing, but it changed the experience of going to a restaurant in that town, and it changed the economy of the restaurateurs. They created a lot more space for a lot more restaurants when all of them were non-smoking. More people went out to dinner. A lot more people. Yeah. So you just never know what the ripples are going to be. I did a one-person action when the US bombed Libya. I stood out on the street corner with a sign. I didn't bother organizing anybody, although I did. I called up the local famous peace activist and said, "Where's the demonstration?" She said, "We haven't set one." I said, "Noon at the courthouse." Nobody else showed up. I don't think she told anybody, and I didn't tell anybody else. But the first day of the sign, I mostly got middle fingers. I did it for 3 days. By the third day, I was mostly getting honks and waves of support. And you see the power of even one person making a difference that way, but you also see the power of 7 or 8 million people gathering together on No King's Day all across the land, not just all coming to Washington or New York or San Francisco. And that you can see that that has made the administration very, very uncomfortable and is putting pressure. And you see the beginnings of defections from this society that has not any respect for the things that have made our government a success all these years. You see that that is starting to lose its attraction. And it's the power of the people. This campaign, the victory that I mentioned yesterday, that took a year, more than a year. The Quakers decided to work to eliminate slavery in the United States in the 1760s. It took 100 years. We have better technology, better communication. We can do it in much, much less time. It took me 3 days to sense a change in public opinion about the bombing of Libya. That's a very short time. It's important to think long term, and it's important to celebrate the little victories that come along that lead to the big victories. But I mean, I was born in 1956. America was an apartheid nation in that time. Blacks and whites were fully segregated in the South and largely segregated in the North. Women were mostly working as mothers, some as nurses or teachers or secretaries or housekeepers. You didn't see women doctors very often, or women lawyers, or women astronauts, or women pretty much anything that other than those professions I named. So this is one short lifetime. Enormous change. Enormous change.
Thank you so much for your time. Did you cover everything you wanted to say? Because
I
you,
think so. Oh, except I should tell people that my website is goingbeyondsustainability.com. Um, and there's lots of information and resources there on how to greenify and increase the social impact of your business, including you can get this book, Guerrilla Marketing to Heal the World, as a PDF for free. Just fill out the subscription form and say that you want it. I don't currently have the web support necessary to put forms in place, but if you put a personal message to me and ask for the book and you subscribe to my newsletter, I will send it to you as a PDF.
all right. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.